Hi, welcome back to CS170. We're in week 3 of the fall session. So what I have here is on the student schedule, we're here on week 3. You can see September 13th, and we're going to be covering chapters, it listed at 4, 3, and 5, but I'm going to do it in order, 3, 4, and 5. And then if you'll see here, the recitation is going to start going into your basic HTML. Okay. Um, so you might notice like a little bit of a pattern here where if you look at the recitations, you're really kind of going into like the mechanical stuff. So things like the numeric conversions and ultimately doing your HTML, you see all this white section. This is the stuff that we'll cover for exam 1, right? So your exam 1 that comes up will be all of this white area here. And all of this blue area will be going into exam 2, right? And then of course, all of this green stuff will be going into your final, okay? Now, if you look at, like I was saying, basically what a lot of what your recitations will be covering is really more of the mechanical type of stuff. So do pay attention, do try to attend those recitations. And if you don't understand what's going on in the recitations, do try to come to the lab hours and try to arrange one-on-one time, like, with your TAs, or, if it doesn't work out with their schedule, there's other TAs that are teaching this class. We're all covering the same stuff. So you should be able to meet with them. These things that are more of the mechanical stuff will definitely be on the exam, and you really want to get those down pat. Okay, so if you have any questions at all, make sure you let us know, because these are important stuff. And of course, you have the assignments as usual, right? We have the posting here, and you have the due date. We have the accept until date. Remember, the accept until date is you have a free late. We'll be able to take it, and you'll get full credit. Normally, the accept until date, if you turn it in late, you only get 50% credit. Okay, so pay attention to that. Now, some people ask me about extra credit. Extra credit is something that, for me, the way I'm handling it is, like I said, I put the question or couple questions or stuff to do in the lecture somewhere, and you're gonna basically do it. And I'm not gonna really grade those those extra credit. I'll look at it. I'll give it a quick eyeball. If you're totally like off base, I'll let you know. But I'm not gonna do a detail review and grading of it because there's a few hundred students, right? And there's only one of me. So I'm just looking at for just general, idea if you did it. And, it's really more for you. If you do it and you totally understand how you got to the answer and you're good with it, then it's great. And you can use that as notes for your exam, right? So really, when I ask you to do these extra credit things, I'm really trying to put you in the habit of doing like certain types of note taking or work that will position you to succeed at your exam. Okay. So that's the thing with extra credit. And extra credit, do try to get it in like on that week that I give you that lecture. So whatever week, whatever lecture I gave you for last week, if you can get it in by the weekend, like the end of the weekend, that would be good. Because what I do is I basically like group all of the emails that come into me by student and by date. And then, I can group them into buckets for like the extra credit per week. So if you end up doing like, a extra credit, like a couple weeks from when the lecture was given, there's a chance I might miss your extra credit for that week. So you don't want that to happen. So do try to get your extra credit in on the same week that I gave you the lecture, right? So for this week's lecture, if you can get in by like Sunday night, that would be good. Usually I use Sunday as my cutoff when I group all my emails together. Okay. All right. So like I said, here we are. We're going to do chapters 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to try to cover chapter 3 right now. And you can see I already went in here. I've set up like a line here in my section here, September 13th, and I set the slides. Once I get done with this lecture, I'll add in the video for that. It'll be YouTube. But of course, as always, I also have the stuff under Media Gallery. Okay, so I go back here to Media Gallery, and you can see I kind of organize it by weeks like this, right? So of course I'll have a week 3 coming up soon. Okay. And I try to put some meaningful labels on here as to what they're covering. Okay. And again, office hours. I have office hours on Friday. Do let me know if you'd like to schedule some time, and I'll block out a slot for you. We'll put it on the calendar. Okay. All right. Let's get on to chapter 3. All right. So chapter 3. You know, this is again almost like before when I was talking about a little bit of the history of computing. There's going to be a number of different things here that essentially you just kind of have to understand. It's almost like memorizing some facts or something like that, right? So try to understand these terms and you just kind of almost like, study, memorize it or whatever, right? It's not like the mechanical stuff. So the mechanical stuff will be more of like the numeric conversions that you were doing, okay? But here's the whole page. I'm not going to repeat all of these different things here. And hopefully we'll hit a lot of these as we go through the lecture. But for sure, these are all coming from the book. So of course, you'll be able to see these on the book when you read it through for chapter 3. Okay, if you don't understand any of these terms, I didn't cover in the lecture or it's not in the book, then let me know and I'll make sure that we clarify on that. Okay, all right, so here we are. So we have different communication types. All right, and it kind of almost lines up a little bit with the lectures we're doing, right? We're in an asynchronous lecture, right? Okay, so that means that we're not on at the same time. We're not like going back and forth at the same time and place, right? So an example of that is email, right? And a lot of different messaging systems, right? So you'll send a message. It doesn't necessarily mean like the person's going to be right there and taking in your message and then responding right away, or even at the same time, right? There could be a lag, could be a couple of days, could be whenever, right? And to contrast that, you have synchronous communication. Generally, same thing would be like something would be like, a phone call. You're talking on the phone, you're both kind of going back and forth, okay? So that's kind of the difference between synchronous and asynchronous communication, okay? So these are the different types of communication here, and you can kind of, it tries to give you like almost an analogy to something that you might already know about, okay? So, this is like sort of, if we were in person in class, this is something you might kind of have like a little discussion between yourselves and come up with examples for each of these. But you can think about these examples and take them down as, for notes for yourself, right? Because that's a good exam question, right? That could be on the exam, right? To give an example of these different types of communication methods, right? So one is a broadcast, right? This is something like, in this case, they're showing a guy talking on a radio, right? He's transmitting out of a transmitter, and there'll be a whole bunch of people that'll be listening to that, right? So you have single sender and many receivers, right? Same thing could be also when you have like a television station, they broadcast the news or something like that. At that time, there's a broadcast and many people are receiving it and listening to it, okay? Something here for, okay, the next thing here is for multicast, right? This is kind of like, in this case, you can see the picture here. They're basically having a meeting, right? A conference call. So it's, when you're here, in the general case where you're just transmitting widely over the airwaves, right? Then it's basically like a very big group transmission. It's almost like accessible to everyone here. Versus here, there's like kind of a specific target audience, right? You see these people are kind of sitting in a conference room here. So it's kind of like a broader broadcast, but it's like a defined group of people, and it's usually a much smaller group of people than just a general broadcast. Okay. Now the the last one that they go into here is the point to point, right? And the most specific thing here would be you dial a phone number for someone and you're calling them, you're talking to them. That's a point to point communication. Okay. All right. So what do I mean? Internet, right? Most of you are probably familiar with the internet. So what does internet support, right? So a lot of you kind of maybe have seen different types of communication over the internet, in your various social media channels, your messenger channels, voice over IP when you're doing stuff over Zoom, or WebEx or whatever, right? So it's a number of different things that you're probably already familiar with and you're using, that is using the internet, okay? So there's point to point, okay? So I can do a point to point where, I do a video chat with whoever, someone that I know, and it's almost like a video call with them, let's say. Or I could even just do a regular voice call with them, right? Voice over IP. And of course, you have asynchronous, right? Asynchronous would be something as simple as email, right? I send something, and then at some point later, someone will respond to my email, maybe, okay? And the point here is that even though something could be asynchronous, you could mimic synchronous communication, okay? And so something example like that would be using the phone, okay? You really can't tell, although technically it is asynchronous, right? You're sending something over the wire, and then, there's something coming back over the wire the other way. But it's fast enough, you can't really tell. So that's why you're saying it's mimicking synchronous communication, although technically it's not, okay? And then, yeah, multicasting, right? Of course, that's possible, right? We all do our video conferences and whatnot. That would be like multicasting. And then you can also post a video that could be widely distributed, right? So you can consider that to be broadcasting, okay? So they gave this example here about tracking a package, right? So you think about a package. So the internet, there's what they call packets, right? There's these different packets of information that's going from you, let's say you're point A, and you're going to someone else that's like point B, right? They could be on the other side of campus, or they could be on the other side of the world, right? It's going over the wire, and it's making these different hops, right? It doesn't just go straight from point A to point B, right? There's a couple of hops in between, because the internet is basically this connection of all these different servers and machines and routers and stuff like that. And you're hopping around from point to point, right? So that's the idea with the internet. There's these packets that are floating around, and we'll get a little bit more into it, right? But they try to draw the analogy here of you shipping a package where you can track your package going from point to point as it goes through its delivery, okay? And so here's like the internet, right? So you can have your screen here, your computer, and this could be like a web server, right? Nowadays, it's probably more like a cloud setup, but yeah, web server is fine, okay, for our discussion here. And then you have all of these different things in between, like I said, and you can see there's many paths to go from your computer to the server and coming back, okay? And you kind of say these are just kind of hopping from point to point until it gets to the web server that you're trying to get to. Okay, so this is what they call basic client server interaction. Okay, so you're the computer here, you're the client computer probably, and you're making requests, right? Let's say you're trying to look at a site for like their news or something like that. So you make a request, and they'll say, oh, this person wants to get this story or something like that, right? And then they'll send it back over here, right? So that's the kind of like the interaction between your client, your computer, with the server computer, right? You're making these requests, and then the server is providing a response to your request. Okay, so so you have a single server request and then a response coming back, right? But there's many of these, one right after the other, right? And it's not just coming from you. There's a whole bunch of other clients that are also hitting a server generally, right? So it's not like you maintain a steady connection, right? You're the client, you make a request, and then they'll come back, the server will come back to you, right? But it's not like you connect up to that server and then you hold that connection open, right? So it's constantly sending messages back and forth. You send the message, they respond to that message, the server. And so we'll talk a little bit more about how it manages this messaging so that it looks like almost like if you're running the program on your computer, on your desktop locally, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, and the only thing other note here is like saying this approach means the server can handle many clients at a time, right? So like I said, I'll send a request. The server may do something, or maybe it's going to be busy doing someone else's request, right? But it kind of stacks things up, queues them up a little bit. It'll process, it'll send the response back, and then it'll take in the next request. And it's constantly processing like one request after another, right? Assuming it's a single server, right? Okay, you can see different types of server relationships here. Okay, so you could be a single client trying to hit against all these servers, or you could be like a single server service all these clients here. Okay, all right. So this is what I was saying before. How does it appear to stay connected, right? When you go through to the website, you know, you're kind of going back and forth with it. Let's say you're looking at your bank account, right? You're checking your balance, maybe you're moving some money around. So it looks just like this. It looks like you're directly connected to computers. Like I almost open the connection to the bank and then I'm just kind of talking to the bank. But reality is that's not what's happening. So it's this idea of how does the website seem persistent? Persistent means that you're connected to that computer, that server, right? So there's this idea of cookies, right? So it stores bits of information so that when you're going back and forth, you're messaging back and forth your request to the bank and it's coming back at its responses, it stores bits of information, okay? And that information allows it to almost like pick up where it left off before, right? So from your perspective, it just looks like maybe it took a little bit longer to come back and forth, but it still looks like you're on the same computer and you're on the same transaction, you're going back and forth, okay? Of course, you probably hear a lot about cookies in terms of like maybe people are storing a little bit more information than you need to facilitate the transaction. Okay, but that's kind of a different story, and we'll probably talk more about that towards the end of this class. It's one of the later lectures. For now, all you have to remember or note is that cookies help to facilitate the idea of like you maintaining a persistent connection with the web server, let's say. Okay. So we talk about IP addresses. So anything that's on the internet, you refer to, whatever. It could be your computer, it could be like a server computer, it could be like any number of things that says it's internet enabled, right? So you hear a lot about this like IoT, right? Internet of Things. Everything has an IP address, right? So that's what it is, Internet Protocol, right? IP address, right? And so up until more recently, the big thing is IP version 4, okay? So you talk about this and this is what it typically looks like here, right? You see this like 128.208.3.200, let's say. So that's the address. It's just like maybe the address for your home, right? Wherever you're sending address, it tells you exactly where to go. And that's the same thing here. Okay, so anything that's connected to the internet is going to have an IP address. Okay. And so each of these numbers goes from 0 to 255, which allows for a lot of IP addresses. Okay. So let's say you look at this and say, well, as a person, I don't know when was the last time anyone here probably typed in like an IP address to get to their website. Probably not, right? So there's another thing that kind of, it's a level of abstraction, right? It's a layer on top of that that basically allows us to say, I don't know, Google, in this case, google.com, right? Instead of having to type in IP addresses, okay? Now, like I said before, with this version 4, IP version 4, you got billions of IP addresses. It would seem like there's like a lot of addresses, right? But with the Internet of Things, we actually are running out of IP addresses. So that's why you have to go to IPv6 now. right? And this allows for 128-bit addresses, right? So you can see it's going to hold a lot more versus IPv4 is 32-bit, okay? And so this is what an IPv6 will look like, okay, in terms of like the addresses, okay? So I think for your purpose, all you need to know is that the big upgrade to go from IPv4 to IPv6 is how many addresses you can address, which is a much bigger number than the billions of addresses that you have under IPv4, okay? Okay, and this is just kind of trying to give you an example of you drawing an analogy to the quote unquote real world in terms of address, okay? And that's really all you're talking about with these IP addresses. All right, now, so I was talking about like how you have this layer on top of this because people don't talk in terms of IP addresses, only the computers do, right? So how do people look at things, right? You know, you already know when you look at any of your Rutgers stuff, you're going to have a .edu, right, as your domain. When you hop onto stuff like Amazon or whatever, you already know they have like .com, right? So that's one way, and that's what they call a top level domain, right? So you see all these like .edu, .com. You probably see a lot of .org. Maybe you see some of like the .mil and the .gov, but probably not much. You probably hardly see any of the .mil. Maybe you see some .gov and .net. So you probably see like more of these guys here, maybe some of this, and hardly any of this, right? So that's what they call top level domains. Okay. So at the beginning, probably these were the biggest ones, right? Right. .com, edu, and maybe some gov here, right? But they've been expanding that, right? And they've been expanding that in terms of countries also, right? So they've added like things with letters for countries. What probably some of you have seen, right? Maybe you see something up from Canada, so it'll have like a CA in there. The UK, right? Probably some of those if you're doing like I don't know some of the BBC stuff, but I guess maybe BBC might have stuff on .com. You know, as usual, like France and Germany and whatnot, right? So how do we break that down? How do we kind of look at this whole address here? So we already talked about this .edu part here, right? So when you look at it, so here's the HTTP, and then here's like the 4 parts here, right? So let's work our way from here. So working our way backwards, we have edu, which is what we just talked about. And then like the Washington, for us, you would say something like Rutgers, right? Instead of saying Washington, be Rutgers, right? So you've gone from like this broad category of all quote unquote educational institution to a specific educational institution, right? In this case, it's Washington University or University of Washington, I should say. And then you say, well, within in this case, Washington University, there's like a lot of different departments. So how do I narrow it down further to get closer to the airport, closer to the address, I should say. And then we say CS, right? So computer science department. Now, once you're in that neighborhood of the computer science, then you say, I want to go to the specific computer, and that's the name of the computer, SPIF here. Okay, so you almost look at this when you look at if you ever sent like regular mail, you see something like EDU might be equivalent of our country, right? Maybe in our case, USA, and then like this might be like New Jersey, right? You know, going down to the state, and then this might be like I don't know, New Brunswick, right? Going down to like the town within the state, and then you know, College Ave would be, and you know, whatever number of College Ave you want to put would be the specific address. So it goes from high to lower to the specific address. Okay. And this just kind of visualize it, you know, into these smaller and smaller slices, right? So like I said, EDU is like the biggest level. And then you go down, you have like here, you have Princeton, and then you have Washington, right? And then within Washington, you have like the departments like Astro and CS, and then you have the specific computer in there. So that's like the hierarchy that you're going down when you're looking at this, okay? And this is another way to look at it, going from the top down, right? You see all of these, and then it goes down, and it goes down, and then the bottom level finally is your specific computer, okay? All right, the analogy for domain name server, which is DNS, domain name server, is in the old days, the idea of a phone book, right? So you ever like do a search right now on the internet for yellow pages or white pages or whatever, it's similar type of thing. Basically, it's just like this directory of all these different addresses, right? Or phone numbers, right? In the old days. So that's what these DNS servers are. So that's why, like I was saying, most people are not going to be talking in terms of IP addresses. They're going to be talking in terms of this, right? Once they type this in, the DNS server helps to convert that to be the IP address, right? So that's what that's its function, these DNS servers, right? They're essentially like your yellow pages, okay? Local area network, wide area network, okay? So I think you only have to really kind of know that local area network is like kind of like a smaller universe, and then wide area network is kind of like a broad regional type of thing, right? So your local area network might be like whatever building or whatever campus you have, and then the wide area network would be basically connecting like a whole bunch of universities, like a wider group, wider geography. So that's the idea of how I would look at local versus wide area network. Okay, so remember the idea I was telling you about packets, right? So this TCP/IP protocol is basically saying, okay, I have this long novel, and then you break it up and you send out these little clips or snippets of your novel using postcards, right? And then you have to have like these little numbers, let's say, right? You see number 1 and chapter 1 and stuff like that. So then the other side that gets all these postcards, they know how to reassemble all of these postcards into that novel. Okay, so these are kind of called, these are not kind of, they are called packets, right? So they're sending these packets. On the other side, they know how to check, how many packets am I expecting? How do I order the packets? If I'm missing a packet, then I can send a message back saying, hey, I'm missing a packet. Please resend that packet, right? So this is their idea of like how to make sure that when you send a message, you get your complete message to the other side. So for those of you that are on campus, you already know this. I don't know how many of you at home will probably have this, but this idea of Ethernet, right? So you have this Ethernet that connects up to your server, and that gives you like essentially high-speed connection for the internet, okay? But probably most of you at home probably are hanging off of like Wi-Fi or something like that. But Ethernet is something out there that is basically supporting this high-speed internet connection, okay? Okay, so this is like a typical layout here, right? So you're in a coffee shop, there's a modem here, and it goes up to your internet service provider, right? Could be your cable company, could be wireless, could be satellite, could be a phone company maybe, right? So these are your internet service providers here, right? So they hook you up, they have a little modem that connects up to your house or your business or whatever. And then you'll go from your internet service provider into what they call internet gateway, and then you talk to other people via their internet gateway, and goes back down. So you could be at home, you're going through here, and then you come back into your local area network of your campus, let's say. So this talks about Wi-Fi. I'm sure most of you have used Wi-Fi. But it's basically Wi-Fi is ultimately going to be connected through one of these things that ultimately get to an internet gateway and then talk to each other that way, right? So your Wi-Fi is probably hanging off down here on the left side. Okay, so you have wireless communications. Okay, and this is it's just a protocol, right? How you're messaging back and forth between all of the people that are connected up to, let's say, the Wi-Fi. Okay, so how you handle the security, how you send information back and forth. Okay. And this just kind of draws a picture of how that Wi-Fi might look like, right? So you remember before we had the internet gateway with the ISP came into the modem here. And then, locally, let's say in your house, maybe you set up a router. Within that router, you can have like the Wi-Fi set up, and then your smartphone, your laptop, or your computer can connect to it. Or you can take your Ethernet cable, right, and connect up. Chances are you probably go from the modem to the router with a wire, and then the router probably has like some Ethernet connections off the back of it, and you can take the Ethernet and connect up to your desktop computer, right? And then everything else like your smartphone or your laptop probably goes off of the Wi-Fi. Okay. All right, so this is just a repeat of what I showed you at the beginning, right? It should be exactly the same. I hope it's the same. But look at all these different terms here and make sure if you didn't get it in this lecture that you also pick it up in the book. And if you still don't get it there, then send me an email or ask your TA, and hopefully we'll get the answer to you. But do pay attention to all these different terms. We'll probably ask you to define them, give examples of these for the exam. Okay. All right. Thank you for your time and look forward to cranking out chapter 4 and 5 soon. Thank you.